Sound design has always been one of my favorite parts of the music production process because of the endless possibilities built upon exploration, combinations, rule making, and rule breaking. There's so many approaches to sound design, so today I want to explore one of those approaches, which I'll be calling the incremental approach. Oftentimes in sound design, the desire to change the sound with big brush strokes is very compelling, especially in the beginning when it's hard to hear subtle changes in the sound. Big swaths of effects can be very attractive. Slap on a filter with a huge peak, sweep it through a sound with distortion at high drive, add an OTT on after that, resample, and have a sound that's kind of damaged beyond repair. Although that way of making sounds can be very exciting, yielding very bombastic sounds quickly, creating sounds out of small, incremental changes can end you with a sound that's a lot more cohesive and thoughtful. The incremental approach is all about stacking small, curated, incremental changes for a more cohesive and curated result. Neither approach is right or wrong, and they often work best in combination. Today I want to explore it so you can consider being more subtle and more precise with your approach. I'll be building a patch from scratch in FazePlant to demonstrate this technique, though I won't be going into detail about the inner workings of FazePlant. This is merely to show off the incremental approach to sound design. So with all that out of the way, let's explore. So I'm going to start with a wavetable, and I'm going to use a personal one. And based off this wavetable I randomly selected, I'm inspired to make a growl sound. I'm going to start with an envelope, and with the incremental approach, I often find it's nice to have one or two modulators being the main source of all the movement so things can be quite cohesive. So let's start by sculpting the dynamic and the initial movement of our sound. Perfect, so that's kind of the beginning place. And what I'm doing is, from the beginning, I'm imagining ways that I can complement each movement with a tiny incremental addition. So for example, with this initial starting point, it's kind of an ooh-yeah, ooh-yeah, ooh-yeah type of sound. So my goal is to continuously add on and complement that without going too extreme. So let's start maybe with some filter movement. Perhaps a nice all pass to accentuate a portion of the sound. And again, I'm not trying to go too extreme at any moment. If I went too extreme with this, that would be setting a big precedent, which, you know, you can do. But I usually like to push something where it starts to sound extreme and then maybe pull it back a bit. Perfect, let's keep stacking. So with distortion in the incremental approach, I definitely think less is more. Distortion is sometimes hard to work backward from. And sometimes while you're improvising a preset, one new effect will inspire the next movement. For example, we started with kind of like a yaoi sound. But with that's starting to make it a bit bit more of like a feline growl, like a yow, yow, like a jaguar or something. So that's going to inspire the kind of how I add more vowel movement from here. Let's add a bit of stereo. And maybe let's back it off a little. So just taking a quick step back so you can hear. And that might even be too extreme. Yeah, maybe that's a bit more tasteful right in the middle. Now with this approach, I usually find it's easier to stick with just 1 or 2 wavetables. If you get too many, you can get a little too crazy. But what I could do is send another version over here, and maybe we could layer in another filter movement on top of that. Maybe like a high pass to accentuate some of that movement, or even a band pass. And now we can just kind of tuck that extra little sweep in there. So it's almost working like an all pass. We're like layering a little frequency band in there of the original wavetable. So we don't want to get too extreme. See, every little incremental change can add so much when they stack and stack and stack. Cool. So let's decide if we want some distortion. Just experiment. Sounds pretty good. I like the subtlety of the overdrive. And then we can just dial back this output gain to taste. Don't be afraid too, you can use macros so you have ways of changing, and like maybe this gain could be mapped to a macro. So you can have more or less of this. But I'm even going to modulate that. Cool. So let's start to move into the effects section. Let's start playing around. So let's add a formant filter in here. That can be really nice. So we're going to build a new envelope filter in here. And I'll explain why in a second I threw this into Snap Heap. I knew I wasn't going to go into too much detail on Faceplant, but I will mention it in a second. Ooh, we're getting a bit more of that OE, like yaru. Now the reason I put this in Snap Heap is now I have the ability to mix this in without using the mix on the whole effect channel there. That's nice. Cool, so that'll be a bit more filter movement. Let's make it up as we go. What can we do with a phaser? So let's turn the rate all the way down. The depth all the way down so it's not moving. And then we can just move that to taste. It's maybe a bit too much movement. Let's try going the other direction. Ooh, that's nice. It's nice. It's like almost subtly subtracting from the sound. Perfect. Let's get a little bit of comb movement in here. Not so extreme. Ooh, maybe if we just get a little bit of that stereo. With this technique too, it's nice because you can add just a little bit of stereo with some effects instead of, one big obvious stereo movement. And with this patch, I'm not too worried about the sub. In this case, I would usually layer something as a sub in a separate patch, or I can even plan ahead. We can add a clean sub now. We can have it go to lane 3. And because we've run out of modulation points with this envelope, I'm just going to copy it. Perfect. So now our sub is cleanly going to lane 3. I could have done this at the beginning. I could have just left it for a separate patch. When it's in the patch though, we could do some final processing to kind of like squish the sub in. But then in this lane, however, we may want to remove some of the sub. So maybe with the slice EQ, we can solo the layer. So we just mute the sub. Perfect. So that can kind of be at the end of the chain. So then these can all combine if we really want. Back to the incremental approach. So we could get a little bit more texture, a little bit of high end from this fuzz. Fill out the top a little bit. Ooh, really add to that movement. This kind of gives the whole sound a bit of a whip to it. But then let's really pull that back. We don't want to go too far with it. Ooh, that gives it just like a nice whip. Now, if we don't want that long tail at the end, this could be a nice time to add in some more obvious filter movement. And I'll do it in a snap heap so that we have control over the dry wet on it. So let's add maybe the nonlinear filter. We'll use a similar envelope shape. And let's just do a nice low pass. See how we're really getting control over that tail now? Now this is a more exaggerated movement. This is less incremental. But from here, we could dial in the mix. This could be set to a macro. Or maybe it ends closed just to tighten the tail. And actually opens up at the top. In this case, though, the whole thing sounds pretty nice. So that'll be another added filter movement. We can control that with a dry wet now. So let's keep playing. How could we use phase distortion? And again, if we add a little bit of stereo, we're adding subtle width into the sound. Let's move that drive just a little bit. So the way it combined with the dry signal really made a big difference there. So maybe I'll actually play with that effect. And the bias really changes things too. And let's just dial that back. Oh yeah, because I don't want to lose too much of what we had going. You know what? This might be a case where it took away from what we had going. Not a fan. So maybe if I'm deciding that, I've done a lot to this sound and I don't want to do too much more, then maybe I can do kind of the final bit of processing to push things all together. So maybe like subtle EQ change, or we could do dynamic control. So we could maybe compress the top a little. And we could still cut out more of that tail too. Ooh, that really tightened things up. And in fact, we can actually use that to our advantage. Now we can add some transient. Ooh. So subtle dynamic even. Maybe this could be something on a macro at some point too. Maybe like how much is it a wobble versus a stab? Or we combine it. And then let's finish this off maybe with a little bit of distortion to kind of glue the sub with our sound. I I think there's still a bit of room to EQ this as well. So what if we just had the highs pump up a bit? You know, I'm hearing one more filter movement we could get in there too. Let's create a slice EQ here. And let's modulate the offset, so it's kind of like our custom notch all pass. Oh yeah, that's that last little bit of incremental movement. Yeah, I don't want that tail at the end, so I'm actually going to increase this dynamic. There we go. A simple but nice, very precise, thoughtful patch. If I were to turn all this off again, let's just build it up step by step. Obviously, there's lots of mini steps within the steps, but let's start with our initial. And this whole band might have actually pushed it too far. Like maybe I like the butteriness. So this could be a macro. This could be like our buttered crunchy knob. So that was a look at what I would call the incremental approach to sound design. It's about achieving a patch through small, incremental changes instead of just stacking on some extreme ones. A lot of times in the past, if I've taught people sound design, I notice they kind of get stuck because they might do 3 or 4 really extreme changes to a sound, like one really big distortion, one really big filter, one really big crazy effect. And then they kind of hit a wall where there's not too much more they feel they can do, even though obviously they could. So perhaps this will just get you thinking about doing small little changes, hearing where you think the sound is going to go based off what's already there, and adding an effect that might complement that or fill in a part of the sound that's not there. Maybe it needs a bit more highs, so a subtle movement introduces highs. Maybe it needs a bit more taken away, so you add a process that takes away. Maybe the dynamic needs to be controlled just a little bit, and then all these little brush strokes to your sound end up with a much more professional, polished patch. I don't know if professional would be the word, but something a bit more thoughtful, a bit more precise and unique, because it'll take all these little changes for someone to get to this point. It feels a bit more personal and a bit more precise. There we go. That's the incremental approach to sound design. This doesn't have to just be used for basses. It could be used for drums, it could be used for leads, pads, whatever it is. But perhaps the next time you're sitting down to do sound design, you'll do things in smaller little increments for one big result in the end. So I hope you have fun with that and enjoy the rest of your day.